Whew, I did it, so you don't have to. I created a full-fledged Supabase self-hosting guide and it was work. Yeah, definitely. It was a lot of work. So, yeah. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to write a Supabase book and that's going to be published somewhere beginning next year probably, just so you know. Oh, what this video is about? Real self-hosting of Supabase. I'll not only show you how to deploy this, but actually how to get rid of the insecure setup that you get with the default Docker Compose. And also I'll show you how to connect a self-hosted S3 storage if you want that. Sounds good? Well, let's go. If you want to have your own S3 server, basically, we will do that now. Like if you don't need that or if you don't want that, you can just skip that part of setting up a custom S3 server. You can also just use Amazon or whatever, but I'll show you how it's done with min.io. So I'll actually just use Hetzner to quickly spin up a Docker server. I'll choose the smallest one. If you have any hosting provider that even provides smaller ones, I mean, 2 gigs of RAM is quite a lot, so yeah. All right, create the server. Now the server spins up and then we need the IP and we also need the password that is being sent to me via email. It's that one here. And it tells me that I can use this IP and log in with this password. And now we make a login to that IP, SSH root at IP. Now it will ask me for the password, which is the one I got sent. And now I quickly need to change the password because it wants me to do so. And now I'm inside of the server. Now on that server, what you want to do is first check if Docker is actually installed. So we'll just do Docker version and it tells us the current version. All right, that's good. So since we are using Docker 23, that also means that we have the new Docker Compose, so we don't need to install it. All right, and now what you want to do is you want to create your Docker Compose file for creating your self-hosted S3. So I'll go open up the editor, nano, and go like docker compose.yaml. And now I'll copy paste something, which I will explain. You'll also find this to be copy pasted from the link in the description. So what is the Docker Compose? Basically, we are defining 2 services here, the min.io service and the nginx service, which will be our proxy to min.io. You don't really have to think too much about this. Like the only thing that's important is that the ports are being opened here. You don't really have to think about the volumes. That's just like the volumes are going to be created next to that Docker Compose file. The only thing that you really want to change, very much so, is this one. Like you need to adapt your root user to whatever you want it to be, your root password as well. And also you want to change this URL, which is basically going to be your S3 API. So in my case, I want it to be s3.active.no.de. Okay, now you can save that with Control S and you can exit with Control X. And that's really it for the Docker side. So the only thing you have to do now is Docker Compose up -d. And then you just wait until that's done. Let's fast forward. When that's done, you can check the status with Docker PS. And you will see that 2 containers are running. Now, what you want to do is you want to copy your server IP. And then you want to visit that in the browser with port 81, not 80. You will be facing that Nginx proxy manager login, and that one doesn't have the credentials from min.io, which we just provided, but it has standard credentials. So it's admin@example.com, and the password is change.me. And when you log in, it will ask you to change that. So I'll just use my email, and I change the password, and then you're good to go. And now you're basically inside of the server proxy manager. So what you want to do now is making your S3, which is already running, accessible. because right now you cannot access it because it's hidden away in the Docker network, which is good. Like before we do anything else, you want to get rid of how we currently access that proxy manager because that's unprotected. So if you had a so-called man-in-the-middle attack, someone could steal your password, and that's what we don't want. So go to proxy hosts, add proxy host, then use whatever domain you have and map it to that IP. I have the domain myproxy.activenode.de pointing to this IP. And now, important, you just give it 127.0.0.1, which is itself. And itself, in this case, since we are accessing port 81, is on port 81. Now you can activate block common exploits. You go to SSL, say request new certificate, force SSL HTTP2, HSTS, and then just agree to let's encrypt and save it. And now that's done and you can move away from the insecure access to your secure access. Same thing, different domain and HTTPS. So let's log back in. Now you want to make sure that your storage is accessible. So you add a proxy host. Remember what we had in the Docker compose file. It said s3.activenode.de. So we'll use that one, s3.activenode.de. Activate WebSockets, simply because it's helpful for the headers it sets. Now the host name is your Docker container name, which is min.io. And the port is, you can't know by the Docker compose file, but it's 9000. That is what min.io internally exposes. Now also here, you want to request a new SSL certificate. And now one more thing to do in the advanced tab is you want to put a few settings here just to make sure that things are not blocking our way. Again, you'll find the settings in the description, so you can just copy paste them from there then. All right, save it. And now there's one thing that is very important, which is when you open that one, it says unable to connect, which is fine, really, it is. I don't want to go into detail into that, but that's fine for our use case. Just fine, no security issues there. Now you have your S3 API, but you also want to have access to the S3 dashboard. That means you need another proxy host. So we'll go s3-.activenode. You can block common exploits and add WebSocket support. You again want to route to min.io, but this time not on port 9000, but on port 9090. You want a SSL certificate. You save that. And now you can go to that dashboard. You enter your user and your password. And you're in. The first thing you want to do is create a test bucket. Then you go to Object Browser, go to Test, go to Upload file, and then just upload whatever you want. Now that should work properly. So yeah, cool, right? Now this isn't our goal. We don't want to upload things there manually, but like it works. And in the settings section, you want to add a server location for completeness sakes. So I just chose Europe South, so EU South. And then just save it and click Restart. And also, since we will be configuring Supabase to use our Supabase bucket, we want to create a bucket named Supabase. Now, very important, the next thing you want to do is go to access keys and create a new access key, because this is going to be used by Supabase. So copy the access key, also copy the secret key, click create, and it will show them again, and then you're good to go. And that's actually already it. Like, there's not much more to do. However, what you maybe want to do now is taking this dashboard offline, because as long as you don't want to upload files manually or create access keys, you can and you should disable this. And now it's still running, but it's not accessible. Cool, right? So your storage is ready. Let's jump to Supabase. So your storage is running now, and FYI, I just renamed that server. That doesn't have any technical impact. If you skip forward to this part of the video, then welcome again, and let's jump into Supabase setup. So let's create a new server. Again, I'm going for Docker pre-installed. I choose the smallest instance. Oh, one node. I'm using Hetzner simply because it's cheap, because you're not going to pay that full amount here. Like, you actually pay per hour, then you can just delete it. So you're not definitely going to pay that full amount. And that is really cool. So there's the link in my description if you want to try it out. All right, so I'll click Create and Buy to create our Supabase server. I'll also rename it right away. Before we jump into setting up Supabase, there's one thing I need to mention, and it is, like, in either case, you should somehow enable backups, which in Hetzner I can easily do here, which I won't do for demoing now, but I mean, your database is running there. So, and you want that backed up. You can do that manually or automate that, but I mean, you can do that, but time is money, and backups aren't that expensive. In this case, it's like 20% of your actual cost. So yeah, I would do that if I were you. Now we have the server set up, and now we need to do quite a few things here. So I got the password sent via email for that server. Here we go. Now I'm doing the same procedure of logging in and changing the password, so I'll just fast forward. So I'm logged in into that Supabase server instance. Now the very first thing to do is cloning that Git repository of Supabase. This can actually take a moment, and that is why it's also important to use that --step one, because otherwise it's taking even longer. Next thing is you move to supabase/docker, and in that directory you'll find a Docker compose file, which you wanna copy to a backup file, just so you have something to compare with. There's also a hidden file, and you wanna copy that one as well. It is env.example. So you go env.example and copy it to env, because the env file will be read by Docker. Now we're going to configure stuff step by step. So first, you want to open up the Docker compose file. And then you go and search for where it says Kong as a service. So you have all of those services here, Studio and database and so on and so forth. And here it says, where is it? Here it says Kong. And there's 3 lines which you actually want to remove. And instead of removing, we'll basically just comment it, which is the same thing. And the reason why you want to remove those is Kong is making sure that things are being routed within Supabase properly. But if you use those 3 lines, Kong will be publicly accessible. And we don't want that. We want to secure it on our own. So that's why we make Kong only accessible to Docker itself. And that is by removing those 3 lines. All right, you can save that with Ctrl+S and exit with Ctrl+X if you use Nano. And the next thing you want to do is edit volumes/API/Kong.yaml. Then you scroll down to the very end. And here you'll find the Supabase dashboard route. And we don't want that route. You want to remove that dashboard. And the simple reason is we want to route to the dashboard on our own and protect it then. We don't want Kong to route there, because that, like, I don't want to go into detail, but if Kong routes there and we have an API URL, like, the dashboard is going to be accessible at API URL/, and that's what we don't want. So I'll just comment it. Save it and close it. Now we go back to the Docker compose file. In the services part, we want to add 2 additional services. The first one you already know if you followed the S3 storage part. You can find the configs to copy paste in the description link. And the second service we want to add is to protect the Supabase dashboard, the Supabase Studio, with more than the basic authentication. But please note, you don't need that. Like, if you're fine with HTTPS and basic authentication, which is fine, then you don't need to have that additional service. I'm just saying, because it also comes with additional configuration, which we do later at the end. So just to run Supabase, you can also follow up without this. But I'm going to add it because this is a full-fledged tutorial, and it's called Authelia. Now, just a very quick primer. We will use the Authelia feeds later to enable authentication in the dashboard. All right, so we added 2 additional services to the Supabase Docker compose file. Let's save that. Now, the first thing we want to configure is your S3 storage. If you don't have that, you don't have to do anything because it will just work out of the box. But if you have S3 storage, then you go back to the Docker compose file and you search for storage. And then within storage, you go to the environment variables. And the first thing you want to change is file to S3. You can remove the file storage backend path. You can change region to wherever your S3 bucket is. And since I'm using it self-hosted, I'll just use a random thing like EU South. Like, it really doesn't matter for my case. It also doesn't have an impact. Like, it has an impact if you're using AWS for real, and then you just provide the region where your AWS S3 is. But like with the thing I've shown, it doesn't have an impact. Okay, global S3 bucket. I'll just want to use Supabase. That's the name of the bucket. Now, very important, global S3 endpoint, because this is going to be s3.activeNode, the S3 instance I've just set up. Now also say that the global S3 protocol is going to be HTTPS. You can also set the AWS default region for completeness sakes. Then for MinIO, I saw that setting this is important for SPAP style. I didn't look it up, I can't tell you why. It's on the Supabase repository. And now, very important, remember your access keys you've created. Yeah, you need them. Access key ID is your access key basically. And now your secret. And I hope I didn't forget anything, and we'll just save it and exit. Now, the next thing you should do is configure your important credentials. I won't change those now simply because it's for demo purposes, but you should change all of those 4. Like, you want to set a proper Postgres password. You want to create a JOT secret. It's called JOT. There's a 1-line node script in the link in my description, how to generate a random one. And there's also a link how you can create the anonymous key and the service role key with that JOT secret. So that's covered. The other thing you most likely want to change on production is the Logflare API key. But again, for demo purposes, I'm just gonna leave all of those secrets as they are. However, there's a few things that we have to change. And one of it is the API external URL. And I want to use supa.activeNode. And that's going to be the URL with which you communicate. Also, what you want to change, but you can change that later as well, is the page URL with which you're going to use Supabase. So say, for example, your app is on whatever.com, then this is going to be like probably https whatever.com. We'll just leave it with localhost 3000 here. Like, this is just your primary. You can also add multiple more by like domain2.de and so on and so forth. But don't forget the protocol to add there as well. Now, the other thing you want to change is the Supabase public URL. That is going to be the link to your studio. I'm going to use supastudio.activeNode. Now, what you can do as well in here is search for SMTP, and then you'll find the setup. Like, for example, if you use prevo.com or Mailjet or Resend or Postmark or whatever, like anything that provides you with SMTP credentials, or even your own email with SMTP, you can provide it here, but you don't have to. And what I mean with that is, in most production environments, you will probably send custom emails anyway. I'm personally not using the Supabase SMTP functions anyway. So yeah, I'm not going to cover that, but I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory. One last thing to add before we jump into the most exciting part, let's go back to the Docker Compose and scroll to the database part. In the database part, you'll see a port which has the localhost IP in front of it. If you want to connect to Postgres later directly, you simply remove that one, and then it's going to be accessible with the password you've chosen on that port. Yeah, personally, I don't want that, so I'll just leave it as is. Awesome. I hope I didn't forget anything. Now you could run Docker Compose up, but when there's so many images, I like to pull them first. Once all the images are pulled, I run Docker Compose up -d. The -d is important, otherwise if you leave the process, like it's going to shut down the containers again. So -d means detached. All right, even though the containers start pretty fast, just give it a few moments to be set up properly. Now, when everything's up and running, the first thing you want to do is go to that IP on port 81. You see your Supabase proxy manager now. You log in with admin@example.com and password is change.me. You have to change email and password. Then you go to the proxy host. Now we want to protect itself because currently we're accessing on the IP unprotected. So we'll go superproxy.activenode.de. So use any domain which points to the server IP. Forward hostname to itself internally at port 81. Yeah, block common exploits. Request a new certificate and agree to Let's Encrypt, save it, and now you can access your proxy manager in a secure way. The next thing you want to do is making the Supabase API accessible. In our configuration, I have set this is super.activenode, and now, very important, it routes to Kong on port 8000. You can surely activate block common exploits. You should activate WebSocket support, and in the SSL tab, you request a new certificate, and then you click save. Now, when we open this, Kong should respond that it doesn't find a route. Perfect. But this message is good because it means that we're properly routing. Now, the next thing is to set up the Supabase dashboard. I configured the subdomain superstudio.activenode to point to the server. And now we forward to hostname studio and port 3000. Activate WebSockets, you can block the common exploits. Now you go to custom locations and you add the location /storage, and this one goes to Kong on port 8000. This is very important because otherwise you wouldn't be able to use the storage in your Supabase dashboard. Now you go to SSL, you request a new certificate, and you click save. Now, if all goes well, you should be able to access Studio now. And yeah, that works, but the problem is that it's not protected at all. So we are routing properly, but we don't have protection. We'll protect it in a minute, but first we want to check if everything works. So table editor, just add a new table. Yep, that works. Can I also add a new column? Yep. Can I add a new row? Yeah, works fine. Now, very important, does the storage work? Now let's test the storage. My test bucket, save. Let's create a new folder, test folder, and try to upload a file here. Nice, that worked. And if you have set up your own S3, it should show up there now. So you go to Object Browser, Supabase, and there's your test bucket, there's your test folder, and there's the file I uploaded. Nice. So you have Supabase Studio and Supabase, and it's running properly, but Supabase Studio is not protected. So the most basic thing you can do now is go to your proxy manager, go to access list, say add access list, protect studio. You can use whatever name you want. Satisfy any, this is important. And go like admin, admin. And then save. Now you go to hosts, to your Super Studio, edit, and go like protect studio, save. Now if I reload, it asks me for admin, admin. So now you have a basic protection of your Supabase Studio. So things just passed and you probably didn't even notice, but things are working. Like you have it. You could stop right there, but we want to do one last thing, or at least I want to do it. And as I said before, you can skip it. Like if you're fine with that, you can skip that. That's just fine. But personally, I don't like the basic authentication. It's not per se insecure, but it doesn't support really like multi-factor authentication or whatnot. And this is supported in theory by Authelia, and this is why I want to activate Authelia. So it's massively hot in here. As you can see, I'm in the roof. Yeah, but let's just finish this up, please. So I don't want to explain Authelia all too much, but just imagine it as another proxy on top, which checks if you're logged in or not, and only then lets you into Supabase Studio. So first I want to show you what we have. So there's the Authelia directory, and if we go into it, we'll see that there's config. We'll go into that. And then there's a configuration file. Now, since the configuration file is quite big, even for an initial setup, I don't want to go too much into detail. Like you can find all of the configuration stuff on the Authelia documentation, but we'll make a copy of that one. Then we delete the original and we'll create a new empty one. Now, what I will do is I will copy the Authelia configuration file that I provided to you in the link in the description. However, we're going to talk about the stuff that you will have to customize. All right, copy pasted. So first things first, again, you already know that from Supabase, you want a job secret, but don't use the same one as for Supabase. Just generate a new job secret. This is going to be the one that Authelia uses for your authentication into your dashboard. Now, the redirection URL might seem silly, but actually that's quite okay. That's just where you're redirected to when you basically don't provide valid stuff. Let's move on. Now I added the configuration for the time-based one-time password, even though in this sample we don't use it, but you have to adapt your root domain to be the issuer. In my case, that's active node. All right, now authentication backend is going to be a simple YAML file. That's quite all right. Now, when you come to the access control part, this is very important. Here, you want to do something like auth.yourdomain.com. In my case, I'm choosing my auth.activenode. So this is where Authelia lives. And since Authelia self, like the portal, shouldn't be protected, we use policy bypass. Now, you want to protect your Supabase Studio. And since the domain that I'm using is superstudio.activenode, I want to have a one-factor, so username, password, authentication. Now you move on to the session, also provide your root domain here, and finally move on to where it says storage, and you can change the encryption key for the storage here, but I'll just leave it as is. Then I'll save it and exit. Base configuration done. For the configuration to be active, I want to say stop the Authelia container and now start it again. All right. Now having that restarted, it hopefully has created some more files. Yes. Now you also have the user's database file. Let's open it. So this one is a user definition, which has username Authelia and the password, which is a Argon2 hash password. And the password is also just Authelia. So if you want to change that, you have to edit that file, or if you want to add new users and you can add them to groups. But as I said, we don't want to go into detail. So you definitely want to change the password and probably the username, but I won't do it. I just wanted to show you where you can do it. So I'll close it again. Now there's 3 more copy-paste things you have to do. And this is for Nginx to work properly. So you go 2 directories upwards, back to supabase/docker, check your directories, and you have nginx snippets there. So let's go in there, check what's there, nothing. And we want to add 3 things in here. First, Authelia location.conf. Also this one you can copy paste from the link, and that one actually works out of the box. So nothing to change here. Save it, exit. Now the next file is Authelia authrequest.conf. Paste it. And there's one thing you want to adapt, and that's the domain here. It should point to your auth domain, so your auth portal domain. In my case, my -auth. Yeah, that should be fine. Save it, exit. Now there's the last one, that's proxy.conf. I also added some more information about that one in the blog post, and I definitely recommend you read it. But for now, we'll just copy paste and it should be running fine. Save it and exit. Okay, that was basically just copy paste work. Now you go to your Supabase proxy manager. We want to set up the auth portal. So in that case, that's my auth active node. The host name is Authelia and the port is 9091. You can surely go block common exploits, and for the sake of proper forwarding, we want to add WebSocket support. Go to SSL, request new certificate, and check all the boxes. And before you click save, you go to the advanced tab. And now you copy this location / and include the proxy conf that we created and which is being mounted in a container. You'll find this snippet as well in the link. Save it. And if all goes well, we can access the auth portal. Perfect. And now if you have it, you can click it and it should show a test login window. So you can try Authelia and Authelia in my case. And yeah, since it doesn't know where to go, it just heads me to Google. That's fine. Awesome. So auth portal seems to work. Now, how do we get Supabase Studio to be protected by Authelia? Let's go edit, remove the basic auth because we want to have it protected by Authelia instead of basic auth. So go publicly accessible. Then in the custom locations, there is /storage routing to Kong instead of Studio. Now this is going to be important in a minute, but let's move to the advanced tab. In that one, you paste the following snippet, which loads the Authelia location conf and the proxy conf as well as the auth request conf. But since we have to route /storage to a different place, we can do so by simply adding another location. But that one shouldn't go to Studio, but instead to Kong 8000. That's it. Save that. Now it says command failed because like the location is doubled. For sure, because we still have it in here and now it's getting confused. So remove it here, save it, go to Super Studio. And now it looks like there's no protection, but I've already logged in, remember? So let's move to a private window. Now open up Supabase Studio. And now you get the login window. And we'll provide Authelia and Authelia. And just to make sure, we want to check if we can upload a file. Yep, works. Okay, so we're nearly done. And I think I've lost like 3 liters of water within that process because it's so freaking hot in here. Now you basically have it all. But there's one last thing which you probably want to know very much. So yeah, what if things change? Because as you can see here, there's no settings page like in the Supabase as a service version. Say for example, you want to change your site URL or want to add additional redirection URLs, then really the only thing you would do is you would go to the env file, or if you want to adapt stuff in your Docker Compose file, wherever the configuration is that you want to change, let's just choose the env file. And then like go to the site URL. Then you would adapt that, save that, exit, and you would simply run Docker Compose up and it should recreate the services that are bound to be changed. But if that doesn't work, then you can just do docker compose down and docker compose up again. You can also just do what we did before, like docker compose stop Authelia, and then like docker compose up and then Authelia, which should work the same way. You know what? I thought this is going to be an easy thing. Like I thought, okay, there's just a docker compose file, I have to adapt it a little bit and I'm there. But in fact, I spent like, I think in total like 30 to 45 hours only preparing that video. Like, and writing that down and all of that stuff and trying it out and figuring out why the S3 wouldn't work and stuff like that. So I hope you can appreciate it. It's actually helpful for whenever I want to self-host again, so I can come back to it. And yeah, put your questions in the comments if you have any. I hope you like it, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.